Okay, so you want to own a sperm bank. You rent a clean medical office, recruit donors, process the accepted material, freeze it in stainless steel tanks, build an online catalog, then sell each vial to a family or fertility clinic for far more than you paid the donor for one visit. At first glance, the markup looks almost absurd. Fairfax Cryobank currently advertises donor compensation of $150 per visit. California Cryobank currently lists donor sperm from $897 to $2,397 per vial. Pay $150. Sell for more than $1,000. Put the difference in the tank. Except that is not the business. The donor payment is not the cost of the product. It is one small expense inside a long filtering process that rejects or loses almost everyone who enters it. California Cryobank says fewer than 1% of applicants make it into its donor portfolio. Fairfax makes the same less than 1% claim about its own program. Then the accepted inventory does not immediately become sellable. Federal regulations still use the term anonymous semen donor. Throughout this episode, we will use ASRM's modern term, non-identified donor, except when quoting legal language. Under those federal rules, the semen must remain in quarantine until required retesting is complete. That retest occurs at least 6 months after the original donation. So your cash leaves now. Recruitment, now. Interviews, now. Clinical screening, now. Laboratory work, now. Donor compensation, now. Liquid nitrogen, now. Revenue, perhaps more than 6 months later. And even after a vial becomes eligible for release, the buyer is not simply purchasing frozen biological material. The buyer is purchasing the belief that you recruited the correct person, recorded the correct medical history, performed the correct testing, matched every code, kept the tank cold, preserved the records, tracked the shipment, and did not sell the same donor into more families than your policy or the law allows. One preventable mistake can follow your company for decades. A mislabeled vial does not become an ordinary refund. An incomplete family history does not become an ordinary customer service ticket. A lost record cannot necessarily be rebuilt after a donor-conceived adult asks for information 18 years later. This is what makes the economics strange. The physical inventory is tiny. The obligation attached to it is enormous. By the end of this video, you will know which version of the business you could actually own, how the donor funnel changes your acquisition cost, why inventory waits 6 months before it can generate revenue, what a compliant laboratory and cryogenic system may cost, how the catalog creates pricing power, why anonymity is disappearing, how family limits turn ethics into inventory control, and what a modeled 24-donor operation might earn when either supply or demand misses the plan. Because a sperm bank is not really a freezer full of vials, it is a long-term trust company with a cryogenic warehouse attached. Before you order a cryogenic tank, you need to decide which business you are opening. The first is private reproductive tissue storage. This company stores material for the person who produced it. A patient may preserve fertility before medical treatment, before a procedure, before military deployment, or simply because future timing is uncertain. The customer already exists. The material already belongs to that customer. You are not recruiting a public donor portfolio, creating profile pages, or distributing one donor's inventory to unrelated families. You are selling intake, processing, annual storage, retrieval, and transfer. This is primarily a recurring storage and laboratory service business. It can still carry serious tracking and tank management obligations, but the commercial model is simpler. One account, one owner. One inventory relationship. The second business is a local donor program attached to a fertility clinic or regional laboratory. This program recruits donors near one or several collection sites, performs or coordinates screening, stores released inventory, and supplies its own clinic or a small network of partners. The clinic relationship creates demand. The local geography creates supply. You may not need hundreds of online profiles. You may need a smaller, reliable portfolio aligned with the patients your clinic already serves. This model can reduce customer acquisition cost because the buyer is already inside the clinical system. It can also create concentration risk. If one clinic changes ownership, changes suppliers, or loses volume, your laboratory can remain full while orders disappear. The third business is the National Cryobank. This is what most people picture. You recruit donors across multiple cities, build a searchable catalog, offer medical histories, genetic information, photographs, interviews, and different identity disclosure options. Store thousands of vials, ship to clinics across the country and sometimes internationally. Track family creation. Reserve inventory for future siblings. Maintain customer service for years after the original purchase. The National Bank is not simply a bigger version of the local program. It combines at least 5 businesses: a donor acquisition company, a regulated tissue establishment, a cryogenic warehouse, an e-commerce catalog, and a records institution that may be contacted by families long after the original transaction. That is the model we will stress test later. But there is one more distinction you need before choosing a building. A sperm bank can perform every step itself, or it can coordinate outside laboratories, medical professionals, genetic counselors, couriers, and storage partners. Outsourcing reduces the equipment you buy. It does not remove your responsibility for knowing who performed each step, what the contract requires, and where the record lives. Federal Current Good Tissue Practice rules require establishments to maintain the names, addresses, and responsibilities of other establishments performing manufacturing steps for them. So the smallest version sells storage. The local version sells access to a clinic's patient flow. The national version sells a trusted portfolio and distribution network. All 3 use cold storage. Only one has to keep recruiting strangers, rejecting almost all of them, and turning donations from the accepted few into a product families may rely on years from now. That is the business we are buying. The vial is the visible product. It is not the complete product. A buyer can see a price, select a donor, pay for storage, and authorize shipment. That makes the transaction look like specialized e-commerce. Underneath the checkout page sits a much larger bundle. The first layer is eligibility. The Food and Drug Administration regulates donated sperm as a human cell, tissue, and cellular or tissue-based product. An establishment that performs manufacturing steps such as recovery, processing, storage, labeling, packaging, or distribution generally must register with FDA and list its products. The establishment must screen and test donors, maintain written procedures intended to reduce communicable disease transmission, and keep records. The second layer is identity and history. The profile may include physical characteristics, education, interests, personal essays, voice recordings, photographs, and family medical history. Those details are not proof of future personality, intelligence, health, or outcome. They are information the bank has collected, organized, and represented under a specific policy. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine recommends detailed medical and family histories and says programs should consider a 3-generation family history reviewed by a qualified genetics professional. It also warns that family history depends on accurate reporting and cannot guarantee the absence of genetic risk. The third layer is compatibility information. A donor may be identified as a carrier for a genetic condition without being affected by it. That does not automatically make the donor unusable. It means the recipient and clinical team may need appropriate counseling and matching information. Your company should not market genetic screening as a perfect filter. It is a risk information system. The fourth layer is chain of custody. Federal rules require a tracking system that can follow the product from donor to consignee or final disposition, and back from consignee to donor. Each product receives a distinct identification code tied to its records. The buyer is paying for the confidence that the code on the vial, the code in the database, and the donor file all refer to the same chain. The fifth layer is future availability. A family may use one donor successfully and later want another child with the same donor. That makes remaining inventory unusually valuable to that family. The first purchase is not only about today's treatment, it can create demand for storage, reservation, and sibling inventory years later. This is why headline pricing can be misleading. California Cryobank's current portfolio spans prices from $897 to $2,397 per vial. It also advertises a reserve program beginning with a $35,000 one-time fee for greater family exclusivity, with additional vials priced separately. That premium is not explained by a different-sized tank. It is explained by scarcity, access, and control over future inventory. The physical vial may be replaceable in a warehouse. The verified donor profile and the family's relationship to that inventory are not. You are not selling a commodity by the ounce. You are selling documented biological access under a promise of traceability. Now we get to the production line. It begins with advertising. A donor program needs a repeat supply of eligible adults who live close enough to visit consistently, are willing to complete a long application, are comfortable with future identity questions, and can remain in the program long enough to justify the screening cost. That immediately makes geography important. A beautiful laboratory in a market without enough suitable applicants is not a sperm bank. It is a cold office with expensive tanks. Major banks advertise compensation because time matters. Fairfax currently says donors can receive $150 per visit and up to roughly $4,000 over a 6-month program. California Cryobank advertises up to $2,400 per month based on a maximum visit schedule and average vial yield. Those are company programs, not universal rates, but they reveal the acquisition problem. You are competing for reliable participation before you know whether the applicant will ever create sellable inventory. The funnel may include an initial application, personal and family medical history, interviews, identity verification, a physical assessment, laboratory evaluation, communicable disease screening and testing, genetic carrier screening, psychoeducational or psychological evaluation under program policy, and repeated monitoring after acceptance. At every stage, a candidate can be excluded, decline to continue, miss appointments, or simply fail to meet the program's quality requirements. California Cryobank says fewer than 1% of applicants enter its portfolio. Fairfax also says it accepts fewer than 1%. These are company-reported funnel claims. They should not be treated as a universal industry acceptance rate, but use them as an operating example. At a 1% conversion rate, every $100 spent to attract and initially process each applicant becomes $10,000 per active donor before deeper clinical screening, testing, or donor compensation. The funnel multiplies applicant-level spending by 100. Suppose your program needs 24 active donors. If the true conversion from initial applicant to active donor is 1%, you may need 2,400 applicants to build that group. And active does not mean permanent. Some donors leave, some age out of program policy, some develop new medical information, some become unavailable before required follow-up testing. Some produce less released inventory than your model expected. So you do not recruit 24 people once. You operate a continuous acquisition machine to keep 24 productive relationships alive. Now look at what the $150 payment actually buys. It buys one completed visit from an already accepted donor. It does not buy the advertising that found him. It does not buy the screening of the 99 applicants who did not enter the portfolio. It does not buy the physician review, genetic counseling, testing, laboratory labor, quality assurance, database, quarantine, or future retesting. And it does not guarantee one sellable vial. The donor is not your cheap supplier. The donor is the final surviving participant in an expensive selection funnel. That is the first place the apparent markup disappears. Your donor is accepted. The first collections arrive. The tank begins to fill. Your revenue still may not begin. Federal rules distinguish directed reproductive donors from what the regulation still calls anonymous semen donors. Using the modern term, for semen from a non-identified donor, the inventory must remain quarantined until required retesting is complete. At least 6 months after the original donation, the donor must provide a new specimen for testing for the relevant communicable disease agents. That rule changes the entire cash cycle. Imagine a normal retailer. It orders inventory in January and sells it in February. Your sperm bank recruits in January, screens in February, begins collection in March, pays operating costs every week, and may not release the earliest inventory until autumn. And the 6 months do not begin when you first paid for advertising. They begin from the relevant donation. A donor can generate repeated batches, each tied into eligibility and testing records. The bank needs software and procedures that distinguish what remains quarantined, what has been released, what has been reserved, what has been shipped, and what can no longer be distributed. The tanks may look like one room of identical metal cylinders. Financially, they contain several different classes of asset: quarantined inventory, released inventory, customer-owned stored inventory, sibling reserved inventory, returned inventory under company policy, inventory held because of a new medical or regulatory review, and inventory that may never become saleable. The bank must prevent those categories from becoming confused. This is where working capital becomes the hidden barrier to entry. Donor acquisition creates cash burn before revenue. A larger accepted cohort creates even more cash burn before revenue. The inexperienced owner sees an empty tank and rushes to fill. The disciplined owner asks whether the company has enough cash to test, store, monitor, and document everything inside until it can legally and responsibly be released. There is another problem. The donor has to return. Your 6-month business model depends on a human being honoring a future appointment. If a donor leaves the program or required eligibility work cannot be completed, some inventory can remain unavailable or require separate review. That makes donor retention part of inventory management. Good scheduling, communication, and compensation are not just human resources issues. They determine whether months of frozen production ever convert into revenue. In February 2025, FDA issued a warning letter to a California sperm bank operation after documenting significant deviations involving donor testing, complete donor screening, timing of test specimens, and written procedures. The letter described cited examples in which inventory was released from quarantine without complete donor screening within the required period. In February 2026, FDA issued a closeout letter saying the company's corrective actions appear to have addressed the cited violations. The agency also said future inspections and regulatory activity would assess whether those corrections remained adequate and sustainable. That does not mean every sperm bank has the same problem. It shows the full compliance cycle: inspection, documented findings, corrective action, and continuing responsibility. The regulator can compare your written procedure with what your records show actually happened. A tank full of inventory is not proof that you produced an asset. Until eligibility, quarantine, retesting, and documentation align, you may have only produced a long-term expense. Now, let us build the modeled bank. This is an original illustrative setup, not an industry average, contractor quote, licensing roadmap, or investment recommendation. You lease approximately 6,000 square feet in a major metropolitan area with access to a large donor pool, airport logistics, and fertility clinic partners. The building needs more than clean paint. You need controlled processing areas, secure records and inventory access, alarmed storage, environmental monitoring, backup power strategy, liquid nitrogen supply, validated equipment, receiving and shipping space, private interview rooms, and a layout that keeps incompatible inventory statuses from being confused. Budget $850,000 for deposits, design, build-out, controlled areas, ventilation where required, access control, electrical work, backup systems, and early rent. Next comes the laboratory and cryogenic system. For this model, install 6 primary storage tanks, additional quarantine capacity, continuous monitoring, alarms, emergency transfer capacity, processing equipment, freezers, and validated support equipment. Budget $600,000. That is not a vendor quote. The actual number changes with tank size, redundancy, whether testing is internal or outsourced, building condition, and local requirements. Then build the information system. You need donor relationship management, applicant tracking, laboratory records, product status, distinct identification codes, inventory location, customer orders, family reporting, shipment history, access permissions, backups, and an audit trail. Budget $300,000 for implementation, validation, integrations, cybersecurity, and the customer catalog. Add $250,000 for regulatory counsel, state licenses, FDA registration work, quality system development, professional services, insurance deposits, training, and contract setup. Add $300,000 for pre-launch donor recruitment, applicant screening, initial testing, and the cost of building inventory that cannot yet be sold. Finally, add $500,000 of working capital. The company will pay laboratory staff, donor coordinators, rent, nitrogen, insurance, marketing, and donor compensation while its first meaningful inventory remains in quarantine. Total modeled startup requirement, $2,800,000. Assume you invest 45%, $1,260,000, and finance the remaining $1,540,000 over 10 years at 8.5%. Modeled annual debt service, approximately $235,000. That amount is manageable only if the catalog begins converting on schedule. The dangerous owner says, "I have room for more tanks." The durable owner says, "I have enough donor supply, clinic demand, and working capital to justify every tank." Cryogenic capacity is easy to admire because it is physical. The real capacity constraints are less visible. How many applicants can your team process without lowering standards? How many donor files can your medical and genetics professionals review? How many batches can quality assurance release correctly? How many customers can your service team support through storage, shipping, pregnancy reporting, and sibling planning? A larger tank does not solve any of those bottlenecks. The correct facility is not the one that can hold the most vials. It is the one whose people, controls, and demand can keep every vial correctly classified for its entire life. You have spent $2,800,000, built the systems, and survived the first quarantine cycle. None of that matters unless the catalog can turn 24 donor relationships into customer demand. Now open the website. Hundreds of donor profiles appear. The customer filters by characteristics, medical information, disclosure type, and available inventory. Some profile information is free. Some may sit behind a subscription or premium access tier. Some families pay to reserve or store vials before they are ready to use them. This is where the bank stops looking like a laboratory and starts looking like a marketplace. But the marketplace is unusual. You cannot create unlimited supply when one profile becomes popular. The donor has a finite period in the program. Each accepted visit produces a limited number of usable units. Family limit policies can stop sales to new families even while physical inventory remains. Existing families may need access for siblings. And new medical information can change how the inventory is presented, reviewed, or used. Scarcity creates pricing power. It also creates a duty not to manufacture false certainty. A donor profile can describe the person who provided the information. It cannot guarantee the future identity of a child. Education does not guarantee intelligence. A personality interview does not guarantee temperament. A photograph does not guarantee appearance. Genetic screening does not guarantee perfect health. Your marketing team must sell useful information without presenting human traits as a ranked product specification. That boundary matters commercially as well as ethically. The fastest way to make a catalog feel premium is to exaggerate what it can predict. The fastest way to destroy trust is for a family to discover that the company sold confidence it did not possess. The strongest. Product pages therefore sell documentation, transparency, and access, not promises about the resulting person. The bank can create several revenue layers around the same released inventory. The vial purchase. Profile or subscription access. Short or long-term storage. Shipping and handling. Reservation programs. Additional family services. And, in some cases, premium exclusivity. California Cryobank's current price page demonstrates the range. Standard portfolio prices run from $897 to $2,397 per vial. Its donor reserve program advertises a $35,000 one-time fee with additional available vials offered separately at $3,000 each. Those are one company's current offerings, not a universal market price. They reveal what the premium customer is paying for, not more liquid nitrogen, more control over scarcity. There is also a retention loop. A family may buy several vials, store unused units, ship one to a clinic, report an outcome, and return years later for sibling inventory. The relationship can last for years, so customer service and forecasting become part of the product. A conventional retailer wants another order. Your customer may need remaining inventory from the same donor and discover there is no new production left. Sell too slowly, and the inventory attached to that profile never earns back its acquisition cost. Sell too aggressively, and existing families cannot obtain future sibling inventory, or the bank reaches a family limit while physical vials remain. The catalog creates the demand. Inventory governance determines whether that demand becomes durable revenue or a future complaint. A customer places an order. The vial still has to reach the correct clinic in usable condition with the correct documents. This is not ordinary fulfillment. The product cannot be placed in a cardboard box beside a frozen meal. Cryogenic shipments typically use specialized tanks designed to maintain temperature during transit. The shipper leaves the bank, travels through a carrier network, reaches a clinic, and usually has to return. The tank itself becomes circulating equipment. California Cryobank says it ships to more than 40 countries using a designated carrier and requires prepaid return of shipping tanks. Lost or late return tanks can trigger additional fees because the company cannot reuse a shipper that has not come back. The customer sees shipping as one line at checkout. The owner sees a fleet of controlled containers moving through airports, loading facilities, clinics, and customs systems. Every shipment needs the correct customer authorization, clinic destination, product code, documentation, release status, packaging, carrier service, tracking record, return plan, and exception procedure. The financial risk is asymmetric. If a normal parcel arrives late, you replace it. If limited inventory from that donor is lost, warmed, misrouted, or used incorrectly, the replacement may not exist. A family can lose a scarce sibling option that no refund recreates. This is why federal tracking rules work in both directions, from donor to consignee and from consignee back to donor. If new communicable disease information appears, the company needs to know which inventory exists and where it went. If a clinic reports a concern, the company needs to identify the associated donor record and any related inventory. The code is not a warehouse convenience. It is the backbone of investigation and corrective action. Then there is the tank room itself. Liquid nitrogen is not expensive enough to be the main economic story. Reliability is. Monitoring has to function at night. Alarm escalation has to reach a person. Emergency capacity has to exist before a tank fails. Staff need access without compromising security. Inventory maps must remain accurate even during a transfer. Equipment needs maintenance and records. A full tank is concentrated value. It may contain customer-owned material, inventory from donors no longer in the program, and records tied to years of future plans. That makes redundancy look wasteful until the one day it is not. The bank does not earn a premium because it knows how to make things cold. It earns a premium because it can keep a biological chain intact while the product moves through time and distance. When the vial reaches the clinic, the shipment ends. Your obligation does not. Once that inventory is used, the business moves from cold chain logistics into identity, medical updates, and relationships that may last for the rest of someone's life. For decades, the industry relied on one word that now creates trouble: anonymous. The donor and recipient would not know each other, and the resulting child would not receive the donor's identity. That promise was built for a world before consumer DNA databases, social media, and modern facial search. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine now recommends different language: directed or identified donors and non-identified donors. The change is not cosmetic. ASRM says true anonymity can no longer be guaranteed. A donor can be identified even if he never uploads his own DNA, because a relative may enter a commercial database and create the connection. That means your company cannot control the complete identity outcome. You can control what you disclose under the contract and law. You cannot control what genetics reveals outside your system 15 years later. This changes donor recruitment. An applicant who believes he is making a permanently anonymous transaction may not be giving informed consent for the world that actually exists. It changes customer expectations. A family choosing a non-identified donor should not be told that future contact is impossible. And it changes record keeping. The record may become important not only for regulatory review, but for a donor-conceived person seeking medical history or identity information years later. State law is beginning to formalize that shift. Colorado's Donor-Conceived Persons and Families Protection Act applies to covered collections, matches, and receipts beginning January 1, 2025. It requires covered programs to collect donor-identifying information and medical history, obtain consent to future identity disclosure, and release identifying and medical information on a qualifying request when a donor-conceived person reaches 18. Covered programs cannot use a donor who refuses the required future identity disclosure for those transactions. A 2025 amendment, House Bill 25-1259, changed the ongoing update and closure rules. Covered banks must encourage donors to report significant medical history updates and document those updates, rather than routinely requesting information every 3 years. The amendment also repealed certain state record stewardship provisions tied to dissolution, bankruptcy, or insolvency. That does not make long-term records disappear as an operating issue. Federal rules still impose minimum retention periods. ASRM recommends permanent donor screening and testing records. Customer-owned inventory, contracts, and professional duties still require a documented continuity and transfer plan. For the owner, the lesson is not one Colorado form. It is that the legal architecture can change while records and relationships remain. A consent process built around an old promise can become unusable in one state before the catalog catches up. Colorado is one state, not a national rule. Other states use different disclosure and licensing structures. California, for example, runs a state tissue bank licensure and surveillance program that includes sperm banks and other assisted reproductive technology tissue facilities. So a national bank does not operate under one clean legal layer. It operates under a federal baseline plus a growing state patchwork. The product page can change in an afternoon. The donor consent and records architecture have to anticipate decades. That makes legal change a product design problem. A donor category that sells well today can become incompatible with a state's future. Requirements. A disclosure promise written in marketing language can become impossible to honor because technology changed around it. The owner who treats privacy as a checkbox will eventually be surprised. The durable bank treats identity policy as a long-term service that has to remain honest even when the world changes. Now imagine one donor becomes extremely popular. His profile converts quickly. Clinics report pregnancies. Families buy remaining vials for future siblings. From a short-term financial perspective, the answer seems obvious. Collect more, sell more, keep the profile active. But inventory attached to one donor profile is not an ordinary bestseller. Programs need a way to limit how widely one donor is used and to track families or births associated with that donor. The United States does not have one universal federal family cap for every sperm bank. ASRM recommends maintaining enough records to set a limit and notes that the appropriate number depends on geography and population. Its guidance discusses a historical suggestion of no more than 25 births in a population of 800,000, while warning that the number may need adjustment. Individual banks can adopt their own policies. Seattle Sperm Bank says it limits each donor to a maximum of 25 families across the United States. States can also legislate. Colorado's enacted law says that once a covered agency knows or reasonably should know that 25 families have been established using one donor's gametes in or outside Colorado, it may not provide that donor to additional families. The law does not limit the number of children within each established family. That turns family reporting into a core inventory control. The bank needs to know when a family has been established, but it may depend on clinics and customers to report outcomes. The physical vial count can be exact, while the family count remains delayed or incomplete. Sell to new families too aggressively, and you can cross a policy or legal limit before the database catches up. Stop too early, and you strand sellable inventory. At the same time, a donor may be closed to new families, while existing families still need sibling access. The system must distinguish those two states. This is why some banks sell family slots or reservation programs. The company is not only selling a vial, it is selling a place inside a limited distribution network. Now, follow the accounting. One donor profile can have 200 physical vials left, while portions are customer-owned, reserved for siblings, blocked for new families, or held for medical review. The warehouse says inventory exists. The policy says it cannot all be sold. That is a classic balance sheet trap. The owner sees units. The business can monetize only authorized relationships. The family limit protects against a social and ethical risk. It also creates scarcity that can support premium reservation pricing. Those two truths can exist at the same time. The company should not create scarcity merely to charge more, but once responsible limits exist, inventory access becomes more valuable. This is where ethics and economics stop being separate chapters. The ethical rule changes the number of customers one donor can serve. That number changes donor lifetime value. Donor lifetime value changes how much you can spend to recruit, screen, and retain him. The family limit is not a footnote. It is one of the most important unit economics assumptions in the entire company. The obvious risk is equipment failure. The larger risks are information failures. Start with misidentification. The wrong code attached to the wrong vial can create consequences that cannot be reversed after use. Then, incomplete screening. A program can have a written procedure and still fail if staff do not follow it, document it, or update it when requirements change. Then, medical history drift. A donor's health and family history do not freeze when the vial does. New diagnoses can appear years later in the donor or the donor's relatives. ASRM recommends mechanisms for updates and future medical use of records. Then, cybersecurity. Your database can contain names, contact information, medical histories, genetic information, recipient accounts, clinic destinations, family reports, and identity disclosure preferences. A data breach does not expose one customer order. It can expose a network of genetically connected people. Then, over-distribution. If family reporting is incomplete or systems across locations do not reconcile, one donor can be used beyond a stated limit. Then, insolvency. A restaurant can close and sell its ovens. A sperm bank may hold customer-owned inventory and records that people expect to exist for decades. Colorado amended its law in 2025 to repeal certain state record stewardship provisions for dissolution, bankruptcy, and insolvency, which shows how the legal patchwork itself can change. That does not make shutdowns simple. Federal retention minimums, customer contracts, professional guidance, notification, and secure transfer still have to be planned before a crisis. Then, marketing risk. The bank can accidentally imply that selected traits predict the resulting child, or that screening removes all genetic uncertainty. The catalog must remain useful without turning people into quality grades. Finally, reputational concentration. Thousands of correct orders can be overshadowed by one serious incident. Trust compounds slowly and collapses quickly. This is why quality assurance is not back-office overhead. It is revenue protection. The bank needs independent review, deviation handling, corrective action, training records, controlled procedures, access controls, and a culture where staff stop distribution when something does not reconcile. That can feel expensive in a good month. It becomes cheap the moment a discrepancy appears. The FDA case we discussed earlier completed a full regulatory cycle. The agency issued a warning in 2025, evaluated corrective actions, and issued a closeout letter in 2026, while reserving the right to test whether the corrections remained effective in future inspections. The lesson is not that the industry is unsafe. The lesson is that the regulator evaluates process evidence and sustained compliance. A clean-looking laboratory and a premium website cannot substitute for matching records, controlled procedures, and honest identity policies. The expensive part of the sperm bank is not keeping material frozen. It is keeping every promise around that material aligned. The obvious way to grow is to add donors. That is not necessarily the best way. More donors create more selection, which can improve customer conversion. They also create more applicant acquisition, screening, quarantine, records, inventory, medical updates, family tracking, and unused stock. A catalog can become wider while the company becomes less efficient. The first scalable asset is donor acquisition density. A collection site near universities, hospitals, and large employment centers can recruit more efficiently than a beautiful suburban lab that candidates cannot visit repeatedly. The second is the clinic network. A bank with reliable relationships can convert inventory without paying for every customer through direct advertising. Clinics care about documentation, delivery, consistency, and support, not only the number of profile photos. The third is the quality system. One validated process can support more volume. One weak process multiplies errors as volume rises. The fourth is the catalog and data layer. Customers need to understand disclosure type, screening information, carrier status, inventory availability, and family policies without receiving false medical certainty. A clear system reduces service cost and builds trust. The fifth is long-term storage. Storage produces recurring revenue and strengthens the relationship, especially when families preserve inventory for future siblings. But storage revenue is not free margin. Every year adds monitoring, customer support, billing, records, and transfer obligations. The sixth is logistics. A larger network can negotiate carrier relationships, reuse shipping tanks efficiently, and serve more clinics. But every additional destination adds regulatory, customs, and exception complexity. The seventh is reputation. This may be the strongest moat. Families and clinics are not likely to choose a bank solely because one vial is $100 cheaper. They are choosing an institution to hold sensitive information and scarce inventory through an emotionally important process. A trusted name lowers friction. That trust is earned through years without losing the chain. The bank can expand into private storage, related reproductive tissue services, record support, or international distribution. Each extension looks adjacent and brings its own medical, legal, and operational requirements.
One cold room does not make every reproductive service the same business.
The most scalable company is not the one with the fullest tank.
It is the one that can add one donor, one family, and one clinic without making the system less reliable for everybody already inside it.
The tank stores units. The network stores trust. Now let us calculate the modeled national regional bank. These are original illustrative assumptions. They are not reported company results, industry averages, clinical forecasts, investment projections, or earnings promises. The facility requires $2,800,000 to open. You invest $1,260,000 of equity and finance $1,540,000 over 10 years at 8.5%. Annual debt service is approximately $235,000. The operating model maintains 24 active donors. Each active donor completes an average of 1.5 accepted collection visits per week for 46 weeks. That creates 1,656 accepted visits during the year. For modeling only, assume each accepted visit ultimately produces an average of 3.2 released retail vials after processing, quality loss, quarantine, and eligibility completion. This is the most sensitive production assumption in the model, not a clinical standard or industry average. If the released yield falls from 3.2 to 2.4 vials per accepted visit, annual production falls by roughly 25% before customer demand changes at all. Annual released production, approximately 5,300 vials. The model does not assume all of them sell immediately. The bank sells 3,600 vials during the year. Average retained vial revenue after discounts and product mix, $1,250. Vial revenue, $4,500,000. Storage, profile access, reservation, handling, and other retained service revenue add $420,000. Total modeled revenue, $4,920,000. Operating cash costs total $4,400,000. Donor compensation, $250,000. Applicant screening, testing, medical and genetic review, including unsuccessful candidates, $800,000. Payroll and benefits, $1,450,000. Facility, liquid nitrogen, equipment, monitoring, maintenance and utilities, $420,000. Shipping supplies, tank circulation, fulfillment and outside logistics, $470,000. Donor recruitment and customer marketing, $520,000. Software, cybersecurity, insurance, legal, compliance, customer support and administration, $490,000. Modeled operating cash profit before debt service and tax, $520,000. After approximately $235,000 of debt service, the modeled pre-tax cash result is about $285,000. On $1,260,000 of equity, that is roughly a 23% pre-tax cash return. Positive, but only because the company maintained its donor cohort, released inventory on time, sold more than 3,500 vials, and held its average retained price. Keep customer pricing the same. Now the bank maintains only 17 active donors instead of 24 because applicant conversion and donor retention miss the plan. Production falls. The catalog becomes thinner. The company sells 2,800 vials at the same $1,250 of average retained revenue. Vial revenue, $3,500,000. Ancillary retained revenue falls to $330,000. Total modeled revenue, $3,830,000. Costs decline, but not in proportion to sales. The building, quality staff, monitoring, software, and much of customer service remain. Assume operating cash costs of $4,050,000. Modeled operating loss before debt service, $220,000. After debt service, modeled pre-tax cash loss, approximately $455,000. The tanks still work. The catalog does not have enough productive supply. Restore 24 active donors and the full production program. Now customer acquisition becomes more expensive, clinic orders weaken, and more sales shift toward lower-priced inventory. The bank sells 3,000 vials instead of 3,600. Average retained vial revenue falls from $1,250 to $1,100. Vial revenue, $3,300,000. Ancillary retained revenue, $350,000. Total modeled revenue, $3,650,000. Because the company kept recruiting and producing before recognizing the demand problem, operating cash costs remain approximately $4,250,000. Modeled operating loss before debt service, $600,000. After debt service, modeled pre-tax cash loss, approximately $835,000. And the missing revenue did not disappear cleanly. Some of it became unsold frozen inventory that still needs storage, tracking, medical history management, and family limit control. This is the central lesson. A donor shortage can break the model. Weak demand can break it too. And overproduction does not protect you from weak demand, because frozen inventory continues carrying obligations. The owner has to measure supply conversion and customer conversion separately. Applicant to active donor. Active visit to released vial. Released vial to paid order. Paid order to reported family outcome. Those 4 conversions determine whether the tank holds an asset or an expense. A sperm bank looks like a laboratory because that is the room everyone photographs. Stainless steel tanks. Cold vapor, gloves, labels, a microscope. The business underneath is much less visual. An applicant who may never qualify. A donor who has to return months later. A test result tied to the correct date. A family history that may change. A distinct code that must follow one vial through every hand. A customer storing inventory for a child they hope to have years from now. A family limit that can stop new sales while physical inventory remains. A donor-conceived adult who may request information at 18. A continuity and transfer plan for records and customer-owned inventory if the company itself is sold or closed. The bank is not paid simply because it can freeze biological material. Many laboratories can make something cold. The bank is paid to turn uncertainty into a documented chain that a family and clinic are willing to trust. It cannot promise the personality of a future child. It cannot promise perfect health. It cannot promise permanent anonymity. It cannot promise that every purchased vial produces the hoped-for outcome. What it can promise is process. The donor was screened under the program's standards. The required testing was completed. The inventory remained quarantined until release. The code matches the record. The tank remained monitored. The shipment went to the authorized clinic. The family policy was followed. The retention and transfer procedures are documented before somebody needs them later. That is why the $150 donor payment and the $2,000 vial price do not reveal the real margin. The difference pays for every rejected applicant, every month of quarantine, every quality review, every unsold vial, every alarm, every shipping tank, every software permission, and every year the records remain available. If those systems work, the company can build a valuable catalog, recurring storage revenue, and a clinic network that is difficult for a new competitor to copy. If they fail, the physical inventory becomes evidence of a promise the company could not keep. So if you decide to own a sperm bank, remember what you are actually buying. The tank is the warehouse. The vial is the inventory. The record is the product. And trust is the moat.